I appreciate you joining us today. We're going to keep the speaking remarks very short so that we can enjoy each other's company and have some stuff to drink and some stuff to eat. But we've got a few things that we want to get covered really quickly. First of all, I wanted to introduce the organization, I2 Coalition. That stands for Internet Infrastructure Coalition. We're a group of companies that build the internet's infrastructure that sits above the telco layer and below the content layer. I was speaking with a congressional staffer today, and he said that when he draws out diagrams of how the internet works, he puts that as the middle part that says, "There be dragons," and that nobody really understands how that works. And our job is to bring the geeks into Congress and to figure out how we can teach you guys what we do for a living in building the infrastructure of the internet. More about that later, but first we are going to give out a couple of awards. This is our third year of our Champions of the Internet Innovation Award, and we've got 2 award recipients this evening. Representatives Sensenbrenner and Conyers. We'll be giving them awards for their efforts on the USA Freedom Act, which was the biggest rollback in surveillance authority in a generation, and has, yes. That effort is a very important first step in helping us in the internet infrastructure economy restore faith in the cloud. And I would like to introduce Kevin Bankston, who is going to introduce Representative, you were introducing Representative Conyers? Sensenbrenner. I'm so sorry. So Kevin? No, so please do.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Bankston. I'm the director of the Open Technology Institute, which worked very closely with Mr. Sensenbrenner and Mr. Conyers' offices on USA Freedom. And I'm here to say that it's times like these, times like this time now today, that require leaders like Jim Sensenbrenner. Leaders with the courage to resist fear with reason and with a respect for our rights as Americans. Leaders willing to put principles over politics, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. Leaders who can bridge the divides between right and left, between industry and government, between privacy advocates and everyone else, to create lasting change. It's for that leadership, which resulted in the passage this summer of the USA Freedom Act that he sponsored, that we are honoring him today. But that's just one of several examples of his leadership when it comes to digital rights. There's his opposition to the idea of mandatory data retention. That is, laws requiring that internet service providers keep logs of everyone's digital comings and goings in case law enforcement and intelligence want it. There's his opposition to the idea of injecting backdoors into our secure products and services, which would threaten the security of everyone while also endangering our economic security. And if you look at these examples of Chairman Sensenbrenner's leadership, you see a couple of themes. First is his sensible recognition that deliberately making communications and technology products offered by American companies less secure, whether through overreaching surveillance laws or data retention mandates or backdoor mandates, is not only bad for the privacy and security of our data, but also bad for America's economic security. And that's an important consideration, one of the reasons why business associations like I2C want to and should honor his work at events like this. But the core of the chairman's positions on these issues seems to me to be reducible to just this. More than just being ineffective or bad for business, it is un-American to treat every American like a suspect. Our founders were better than that, as demonstrated by their repudiation of general warrants, their support for the Fourth Amendment. We are better than that. And we must continue to be better than that, whatever tragedies may come, whatever threats we must face, and there will be many, if the past week's tragedy has been any guide. Which brings me back to where I started. Times like these, times like this time now, today, call for leaders like Jim Sensenbrenner. And I invite you all to please join me in thanking him for his continued leadership in the support of our digital rights. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for this award. Yeah. Let me say the fight's not over with. Today, Senator Cotton introduced a bill to repeal the Freedom Act. I don't think it's going to get very far, but it shows that there are some people who are attempting to use tragedies like the one that happened Friday night in Paris to try to go back to the bad old days. Let me say that bulk collection is still going on. There was a 6-month period for the transition from the old system as interpreted by the FISA court under the Patriot Act to the new system in the Freedom Act. Paris happened with the old system, so it showed that bulk collection will not stop an attack like the tragedy that occurred in Paris. And the fact that at least some of the suspects in Paris were on the radar screen of both French and Belgian intelligence indicates that under the Freedom Act, should information like this come here, the intelligence and law enforcement community would be able to get a warrant from the FISA court to get information on what these folks were up to and hopefully stop them before they did it and killed and injured people. I would like to say that I appreciate the support of this organization and many of the people in this room when John Conyers and I started out with the Freedom Act. We knew that what had happened was not in the Patriot Act. As the author of the Patriot Act, I was very vocal in saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not what Congress intended. And we were kind of alone when we started out in June and July of 2014 or 2013. As things developed, there were a lot of people that saw the light. And one after the other, folks changed their minds, whether it was the White House, whether it was Speaker Boehner, whether it was the intelligence and law enforcement communities. The dominoes started falling one by one by one by one. And as a result, we were able to make some meaningful and permanent changes to the law relative to surveillance, which, in my opinion, are consistent with what the framers intended and consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So let me say thank you for your help on the Freedom Act. Don't quit yet, because there are those that are trying to undo it. We still have to update the Electronic Privacy Act of 1986. That's not going to be easy to do, but both that and the Freedom Act were the right thing to do and consistent with American values and with what James Madison intended when he drafted the Bill of Rights. So thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Pictures? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to invite our good friend Harley Geiger up here with CDT to introduce Congressman Conyers.
And as Dean of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mr. Conyers has weathered innumerable challenges to internet freedom and civil liberties during his decades in office. And of his many notable feats, I will only focus on two topical items for the sake of brevity. First, Representative Conyers has consistently spoken out against government mandates to weaken encryption. As far back as 1997, when Congress was considering export controls on encryption, Mr. Conyers argued that weakening encryption would in fact place U.S. companies at a disadvantage and that encryption was crucial for user security. In 1997, Mr. Conyers got it, and we're still having that fight today. And second, Representative Conyers, along with tonight's other honoree, of course, Mr. Sensenbrenner, authored the USA Freedom Act of 2015 and guided it to overwhelming passage in the House. And this legislation ended the bulk collection of Americans' communications records under the Patriot Act, which is a very rare reform to the mass surveillance that has undermined global trust in U.S. tech companies and threatened the civil liberties of all Americans. The passage of that bill is a major victory for Mr. Conyers, Mr. Sensenbrenner, and for internet freedom in general. So we have many, many more fights ahead of us on internet freedom and innovation. And law, of course, is not crafted in a vacuum. Legislation depends very much on the principles of individual lawmakers. And in that regard, we are lucky, we as a nation are lucky to have Mr. Conyers sitting atop the House Judiciary Committee. So thank you, Mr. Conyers, for your service, and thank you to your excellent staff.
Thanks, Harley. Good evening, everybody. I am very proud to stand next to Jim Sensenbrenner. He's a guy that thinks like me, and that we don't mind crossing the aisle to talk to each other. And we've had a very fractured kind of Congress this time, maybe the last time too. And so it's just good for my morale to come out every now and then and know that there's an I2 coalition that exists. And I want to give you all a big round of applause, even if I wasn't getting an award. It's funny about this political process. You know, in a real democracy, things happen. People form ideas. And I just want to make a confession that it's quite easy for me, because I work in the shadow of the most impressive man I ever met in my life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't really wake up and say, I wonder what Dr. King would have done in this case, because I'm already thinking. I was thinking about him last night and the night before last, so I don't really say that in my head, but I say it to you that what he said and did and how he did it. How can you take on government restrictions and fighting against democratic concepts and trying to get more people to vote when there's another group almost publicly working to get less people to vote? How do you explain complicated acts? I voted on so many things so far that I forgot how I voted on them, because it was just how I was feeling that day in the well. And was I upset about something? Was I feeling good about something? Or did I decide to give some of my narrow-minded friends the benefit of the doubt, or did I just say to hell with them? I'm going to make this point. The one thing that I do keep in front of my mind is that every single thing I do as a member of Congress in this great body is recorded. Everything. And I want to start going into it and find out what was this little trail I left, my little footprint and yours. And now, tonight, me and I2 Coalition come together. And now I want to find out what you guys are doing, and admire the fact that we fought bulk collection of metadata together, that we created a panel of experts. We had the search for inescapable transparency, and it's still going on. Sensenbrenner was right. This thing is far from over. As a matter of fact, it continues. These struggles are continuing. And this is why, amazingly enough, I still love this job. I love my work. I love the work that you do, and we're just beginning to realize that we've got some more unfinished legislation in this area. But it all connects up, because in the end, I'm trying to make this more meaningful to a lot of people who might not even have a computer or an iPad or know anything about some of the issues that you work with on a regular basis. And so it's in that spirit that I very humbly accept this award. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I promise to work even more closely with you as we move into the future, because the challenges are still there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir, so much.
All right. Thank you, sir.
And we humbly thank you and Representative Sensenbrenner for your tireless efforts, and we cannot wait to work with you on the next step and the next step and the next step. We thank our friends Harley and Kevin for introducing them today, and we also want to thank Chairman Goodlatte for making sure that that bill got brought up for votes. So thanks to everybody for that. We are going to move to networking in just a few minutes, but I do have one last speaker that I want to bring up here, and this is very important to me. So this is the third year that we have done an I2 Coalition fly-in, where we've brought dozens of the cloud's most important and thought leaders to Capitol Hill, and we've done it so that they could come here and fight for internet freedom. It's very important stuff, but it takes them away from their business. And so we've got these cloud leaders that have come in here to try and help us fight the good fight on issues that are important to the entire industry. And what we've liked to do over each year is bring in somebody who can help inspire us in our ongoing efforts. So we've had a featured speaker each year in our events. And this year, I got extremely lucky to have had one of my own personal internet heroes say yes to coming and saying a few words to us. Mitchell Baker, the CEO of Mozilla. My background is as I ran a small internet company wherein we were developing web hosting solutions on open source software. And the things that Mitchell has done as the head of Mozilla for the open source software movement in legitimizing it and bringing it into the public sphere, and the things that she has done in order to advance the efforts of privacy and security in that same area have inspired me. And so I would like to call her up to say a few words to the community in hopes that she can maybe inspire our community a little bit. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, the internet is a remarkable technology, probably the most important collaborative tool and communications tool we'll see in our lifetimes. And clearly I love it. I've spent my life building it, trying to build opportunity and openness and innovation on top of the internet platform. It's such a powerful platform that it shapes thinking in ways that are quite surprising. And in particular, it threatens to upset the balance between the citizen and our governments. The United States, democratic nation, one of the world's great democratic nations, trendsetter in defining the relationship between a citizen and a government, and in creating a government which is aimed at serving its citizens, both in civil liberties and also in economic opportunity, in providing a business opportunity where innovation can flourish and entrepreneurship has a chance, and it's possible to bring new ideas to life. We have our relatively short history, our 200, 300 years of history in balancing individual rights the rights of the government, privacy, national security. We have a history, it's got ups and downs. It's a history we can be proud of. Today, the power of the internet causes us to forget that history. And too often, legislation or threats or risks cause us to look and be afraid and move entirely to the fear end of the spectrum, to the surveillance end of the spectrum, to the law enforcement end, to government suddenly beneficent and government able to possess all power, and we the citizens assume that our government will always be beneficent. Not just us, but the other great democracies are having this discussion as well. And so these organizations, these institutions, and our honored guests tonight are critical in continuing the discussion of what it means to be a democracy, what it means to value the rights of individual citizens, and what it means to empower economic opportunity of individuals. So these kinds of conversations are just the beginning. We can tell more are coming. How to have effective law enforcement at the same time as civil liberties and privacy. Clearly, that's a social discussion we'll be having for the coming decades in the current global political environment. Having leaders who have the foresight and the courage and the effectiveness to represent the openness of society, the balance in a democratic society, the power of the internet for collaboration, the power of a trusted network to bring business opportunities is critical. I'm honored to be here with the representatives, but also honored to be here with you, who are the current and future generations for leading this discussion and for keeping in mind the power of the internet to generate activities, business activities, and to be a trustworthy organization to help us have a relationship with our government that continues to be one where individuals and civil liberties and citizenship have a real meaning. And so I look forward to doing more. Mozilla is pretty active in these areas. I was somewhat inspired by the conversations about 1997, the discussions about export control, because I was involved in those as well, back from Silicon Valley with Netscape. Many of you may remember Netscape Navigator. When we started, the encryption limits were 56-bit, not enough to make a trustworthy commercial system. And so we had long discussions. Netscape was extremely active, probably the most active company in that era in explaining and demonstrating that a trustworthy internet is good for business, and that a trustworthy internet required 128-bit encryption, and that if we could provide a trustworthy internet, commerce, economic activity, banking activity, health activity, the range of civil and social and public benefit would grow immensely. And interestingly, in that discussion, there was also a terrorist incident in the middle of that discussion, which threatened to derail the change to 128-bit encryption. But at that time as well, we had good leaders, we had the right coalition, and we were successful. And so this discussion will continue. It's probably a discussion of a generation to figure out how our democratic values and traditions and how our drive to enable individuals to be able to build economic value and businesses and companies, how that plays out with the power of a technology like the internet. And so I inspired myself and encouraged, and there's certainly plenty of work to do, and to continue the discussion, how much freedom can we have as citizens in a safe and healthy society, and how much of the open internet can we carry forward for the future? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Well, that certainly did inspire me. I am so proud to be a part of this organization and to be a part of driving these conversations. We're going to jump right into more conversations. There is obviously a lot of great work, important work that needs to be done, and it's going to be done by people talking to one another. If you're in this room, if you're on the live stream, there are issues that we're talking about today that obviously matter to you. So let's jump right into them. Let's have some beers together. Let's have some food together. Let's advance these conversations today and every day. once we're past this reception at 7, please join us for an after party that we're having at the WeWork facility in DuPont Circle, hosted by our friends at WeWork. So hang out with us, advance these conversations, and thank you for joining us today.